Welcome back to the M&M Discipleship Podcast. This is Michael Round, and this is my co-host, as always, Dakota Moody. Dakota, how's it going?
It's going great. It's going great. A lot of great things going on right now. Very, very happy. It's a good time. Weather started to dip back down into the colder, more wintry mix, but I kind of like that. Kind of up for that, to be honest with you. That's more my speed. Go ahead. What?
Still is February. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know where you are, but we had a taste of spring
Yeah.
week before or last week. But yeah, it went back to winter real quick.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. A little fake spring came out of there, and I mean, you shouldn't expect spring in February, to be honest, you know. But it was nice when they went back to winter. But there's still a lot of great things going on right now. Now, Michael, for those of you, those who are not on the podcast, they will notice that you are in some different digs than normal today. It seems like you had to stay home. You want to tell people why that's the case?
Yeah, I've been battling the flu. Thankfully, I'm feeling a lot better. So I
Mm.
might sound a little congested, but yeah, I'm still trying not to get other people sick. So I am at home and I will be for another day or so. But no, it's good to be back. And we took a week off. We were trying to figure out exactly the plan for this week, and I think we've got a good one. But before we do that, anything else exciting going on with you?
Not necessarily at the moment. I'm sure the people there where you're at are going to appreciate you not getting them sick. So that's always positive. There's just so much sickness going on right now, but life just continues on. It's exciting times always. I think we're very blessed just in every way in the country that we live in to be free, to be prosperous, and I hope that you all feel God's blessing as well in your lives. And I hope that this conversation we're about to have is also going to be a blessing to you, because today we're going to talk about a book that me and Michael have read together. That we've spent a lot of time in. And before we kind of get into it, I do want to just mention every time we bring up a book, we're never going to be fully agreeing with everything that everyone says in every book we read. However, I think it's important that when we read these books, there's great conversations to be started with them. And what we hope to do is kind of use whatever book we're going to get into as kind of a starting point to our own conversations to be able to talk about them within our own context. Because not everything's going to be the same as whoever has written the book in their situation, but we hope to use these conversations to start ideas flowing within our own congregation and our own congregations, and hopefully you will benefit from this conversation as well. So, Michael, what is the book we are going to be discussing over the next couple weeks?
It is Deep and Wide by Andy Stanley. Many of you have probably heard the name Andy Stanley. He is a megachurch pastor out of Atlanta, Georgia. It's what North Point is the North Point Community Church, I believe it is, and they have a global reach. Really, they have thousands of members. But the subtitle, I think, uh, gets a taste of what the book's about, as subtitles usually do. Creating churches unchurched people love to attend. And when you start to think about that, it's like, wait a second, what is an unchurched person? And why wouldn't they love to attend church? So, like, Dakota, what are some questions that Stanley talks about in the beginning that questions our idea of what church is about?
Yeah, I think what he brings up is some things that we don't necessarily think about as maybe week to week church members, about what church is like for people who aren't week to week churchgoers, people who didn't grow up in church, things we kind of take for granted. The language that we use, the way that we structure services, the different things that go on within services. That if you have grown up going to church, if you go to church every week, with a lot of the things within the culture of church, we kind of take for granted, where other people who did not grow up in church, did not grow up in faith, have not gone regularly to church. It's very different for them. So when we every Sunday, go to church and we either have a song book or we have the songs up on the PowerPoint, and we start singing songs that we grew up singing. That's normal to us because we know the songs. We've always sung these songs. We know them all well by heart. People who come in who have never grown up going to church, or do not go to church regularly, it's a whole different experience for them to sing songs that maybe people wrote in the 1700s or earlier, or 1800s, 1900s, and just songs that are, over 100 years old that they have never heard before or have no experience with. To us, it's just, hey, it's just what we do. For them, it's very different. I know one experience I also had whenever I was working at a church for a little bit interning up in St. Louis. We had the Lord's Supper. We were passing around the tray with the crackers, and there were the bread, which really was crackers, and there was the little individual pieces that people had, and then there was the one big piece where people could break off the bread if they wanted to. And there was a man there who clearly has not grown up in church, was not familiar with the communion practice. He looked at it, thanked me for handing him the tray, took the whole big cracker and started eating it. Because to him it was like, hey, I guess you're offering some food, and there's the big one. I'm gonna take that. I'm not gonna take these little pieces, and kept going, not knowing that, of course, we kind of use that big piece so that way people can break off pieces if they want to break them off, if they want to break the bread, as it were, as it comes through. He wasn't familiar with that. And to us, it's like, that was weird. Why would you do something like that? But for him, he didn't necessarily know better because he is not a person who regularly attends church. It's something he doesn't know. And
Yeah.
and we hope that, of course, somebody who comes into church won't feel too off put by some of the things that we have already established in our church culture. But that's kind of what Andy Stanley is talking about. What is your church a church that unchurched people will feel welcomed in?
Well, and even assumptions like what the Lord's Supper is.
Yeah.
An unchurched individual probably doesn't know what the Lord's Supper is or why we do it. And so when we start passing these things around, they're like, well, should I take it? Should I not? And or even if you're among other church groups, there's like, oh, so we're doing this every week. Or, the way you sing, something as I guess, I don't know, as second nature as standing up. When do I stand up? When do I sit
Yeah.
down? If I stand too long, am I standing by myself? Um, you
Hmm.
know, where do I go? There's a lot of things. And I loved reading this book because it did help me to put on a new set of glasses, realizing that, well, what is it that people that have no idea what church is about, have no idea who God is, what they think of church? And how can we help people that are seeking?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think a lot of what you're talking about, if a family of four comes in and they're wanting to come to church, and they come during the Bible study period, and they've got a child in what age range, another child in another age range, and they come in through the doors, well, they know where to take their kids. Will they know where
Right?
the auditorium is? Will they have somebody greet them and tell them where to go? Will they, whenever they come into the worship setting, will they be greeted? Will they be uncomfortable? What will the experience be like? Will they have no idea what's going on? Will they want to come back? Um,
Mm.
because of all these kind of experiences. And again, I think it's important for us to have the conversation about what is our churches, how do we set up our churches and do these things? Should they just be for the seeker, for those first time unchurched people to come into, or should they just be for the members, or can there be a mix? And I think that's the thing that I think is important when we have this conversation, because I agree with you. I think when we talked about these conversations with Andy Stanley, I think it did open our eyes to a lot of these things that we just don't really think about, because we just take it for granted that somebody's going to come through our doors and they're going to know exactly where to take their children for Bible class. But that's a presumption that we're making.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's not actually true. But at the same juncture, though, should everything in service be for unchurched people? And I think that's kind of where Stanley gets to throughout his book. And this is where, again, I go back to the point where we don't necessarily agree with everything he says, because I don't think church should only be for unchurched people. At the end of the day, the people who come more regularly are the people who I think most of church should be about. But at the same juncture, though, can you do that to the detriment where it's almost hostile to people who are unchurched?
Right. Oh, yeah. Well, and I would say in general, we need to start with making our churches welcoming,
Yeah,
period. There was a
absolutely.
church, a bigger church with a preacher that's very well known that we visited when we were out of town. and not a single male, not a single man addressed us. We walked all the way to we came in the front door. There were men all around. Women, a couple of women came up and talked to us, but men would look at us and then look away. And we were a family. I guess it was a couple. It was just two of us. So, and then we walk all the way to a pew, and then people finally start talking to us. But it was very cold. It
Mhm.
was not what you want. So, first of all, are we even welcoming in general? Like you said, are we
Yeah.
greeting people? And I think that's a good place to start. But then Andy Stanley brings up some really good points about churches in general. If you're in the Southeast, there are churches everywhere. Now,
Everywhere.
I know that's not true of all locations, but there are churches of most every kind of flavor everywhere. And one of the things he brings
Yeah.
out is that the city that he was in, Atlanta doesn't need another church. Atlanta needs a different kind of church. Atlanta needs a church where church people are comfortable bringing their unchurched friends, family members, and neighbors. A church where unbelievers can come and hear the life-changing truth that God cares for them and that Jesus Christ died for their sins. We've come together to create a church unchurched people will love to attend. Now, when it comes to those points, I'm all for that.
Yeah.
Yes, we should be a church where people should feel comfortable inviting their friends. I think that's really a good test. If your members are inviting people, okay, they feel good about what the church is doing. They, how things are going.
Mhm.
And we want, obviously, for unbelievers, non-Christians to be able to come. So when we think about that, Dakota, what are some things that go through your mind about church in general?
Yeah, well, I think first off, I agree completely with the point that you make when it comes to how many churches we've got. I mean, they don't call it the Bible Belt for nothing. You know, I
Yeah.
grew up I grew up in a town. It's not the smallest town ever, but I grew up in a town where like there's more. If you said if there's one kind of building that there is more than just about any other type of building in the county other than a house. You probably have to say it's churches. And I know there is towns like, for example, me and Michael both knew Clyde. Clyde is the town Michael grew up in. Um, there's more churches than stoplights. There's more churches than gas stations. There's more churches than grocery stores. There's more churches than just about anything else. I mean, you could walk from if you're on the street in downtown Clyde, which is one kind of road, you could walk, I know, within an hour to 10 different churches. And that didn't even talk about all the churches that were kind of on the outskirts of Clyde. There are churches everywhere of all different types and flavors in that way. However, in that same at that same juncture, how are they set up? Are they all kind of the same? Would you feel the same if you walked into a lot of uh, if you walked into the different churches? Would they be kind of the same kind of thing where they are doing their own thing and you kind of have to go to what they are doing rather than walking in and feeling comfortable regardless of which church you go into? And I think that's where he's asking this question about when you come into these churches, would you feel confident bringing your friend in and them feeling comforted and welcomed? And I think one of the ways in which that begins to happen is what you've already mentioned, which is there somebody to welcome them in? Is there somebody
Hmm.
to tell them where to go? Is there somebody that makes them feel at home? Before it's not that they could walk all the way into the auditorium and reach a pew before somebody grabbed them and talked to them. I think that's one way to do it. And I think another thing would be, is there maybe something that can help them to, is there bulletins easily available? Is there some kind of literature that can maybe help them to understand what they're walking into?
Hmm.
And then third, I would say, how do things begin? Um,
Hmm.
what is when you're going through the welcome that maybe somebody stands up to do or whatever? Is there some way that they tell you kind of how church is going to function? I know at our congregation, the person that does the welcome, they welcome everybody who's there. especially the visitors, and that's standard for most churches. But one thing I know that we do that other churches don't necessarily always do is that we talk about, hey, we're going to have a Lord's Supper. And when we take the Lord's Supper, trays are going to be passed to you. If you have some issue with the cup, give it a little twist so that way it can come out at that point. And we kind of address the fact that there's going to be a Lord's Supper. We're going to do it every
Mm.
week and kind of how to do that. And just a little thing like that can help prepare somebody for when that time comes. Because again, as we talked about before, if you're somebody who doesn't go to church, you don't understand the concept of the Lord's Supper or what's going on. It's good to have that little bit of warning beforehand, so that way you know, oh, people are going to be passing me trays later, and when this happens, oh, I need to, I can just take of this and take of that and just keep passing it along, and it's not going to be a shock to your system. Little things like that, I think, can go a long way to helping people who have not been in church or maybe aren't as experienced, kind of know what to do.
Oh yeah. And then to some assumptions that we have, and I think this is where we can get into trouble as ministers. But just like if you are somebody who is teaching a class or preaching, and I mean at any age, one of the things Stanley brings out is we shouldn't make assumptions about what people know and don't know.
Mm,
And even
yeah,
people that have been raised in the church, they might not know everything that other people know. And so if we try and explain everything and we try and break it down and make people not or don't allow people to feel stupid for not knowing something, that goes a
yeah,
long ways in welcoming people who are unchurched. Because one of the things that Stanley talks about, is how like the church started as something that was so on fire. So they were excited, and it turned into like an institution,
yeah.
and how it was really a club where it's all insider focused, and how it didn't look much like what the church was supposed to be like. And today, I think that's what it can be. It can be more like a country club where we have members, and then, you're not a member. And so you don't belong here, and you can't come here. And so we need to be mindful of that and be
Hmm.
welcoming. And we want people to come to the church. We want people to know Jesus rather than making it harder on people to know Jesus or making it harder for people to want to know more.
Yeah. Yep, and I think responsibilities for teachers and preachers in this way. I think there's an importance to remembering this, because something I found out very quickly at both the last congregation I was at and this congregation. I have offered to teach a foundations class, which just talked about foundational things within Scripture. We kind of started in Genesis. We didn't go through every single passage. We hit the highlights, but you realize, there's things that have been assumed that people would know. People who maybe have been going to church for 20 years, they just know that Abraham begot Isaac begot Jacob, and you just understand and he begot Joseph and his brothers, right? And you just understand these things. Well, there's people who have gone to church for 10, 20 years, and they may not they couldn't tell you, okay, Isaac, who's Isaac's father? What is Isaac's story in general?
Right.
Yeah, and they can't tell you these things, and you can maybe take those things for granted if you're preaching, if you're teaching that, oh yeah, well, we know, Isaac's father was Abraham. Well, you shouldn't always assume that in conversations, in teaching, in sermons and lessons. And I think, whenever we bring up stories like this, it's helpful to just say, and we know that Abraham is the father of Isaac, and say it in a way that people can understand. We can almost summarize stories, so that way we're not just assuming that people automatically know the situation, but we can kind of explain it to them. And I think also for preacher's sake, whenever you are closing up a lesson, always make sure the gospel is in there.
Mm.
Always make sure that you're presenting the gospel. And this is a good rule in all situations, but especially for those people who maybe are unchurched and don't know the gospel message. Um, present them the fact that the gospel is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And we accept that in the waters of baptism. And that is how we put on Christ. And it's a way to succinctly, I would say there needs to be some way in every invitation that we put that in there. And we talk about how Christ died for the sins of the world on the cross and was raised on the third day. And that is the good news of Jesus Christ. And we present that fact to them every week because, again, you can't just assume that people know that, especially for those who are unchurched. This may be the first time that they truly ever hear the gospel.
Hmm.
How
Definitely.
important is that to add to every sermon, even if you're talking about Philemon, or you're talking about Habakkuk, or you're talking about whatever you want to be talking about? When you finish bringing your invitation, make sure the gospel is the end of the conversation, so that way people can hear it, know it, and hopefully accept it.
Mm. So as we think through this, I think it's important that we kind of round this out by thinking about how we can practically apply this. And I'm going to ask you for your thoughts on that in a minute. But before we do, I just want one more word on this. In the first century, the Christians were known for their hospitality. They were known for their love for each other. Like they took each other in, they ate together, they were fellowshipping together, they were sharing together. And that's another thing. Hold on. The word fellowship, we don't use that in real life. That's an insider word.
Yes.
Explain words like that. They were sharing time together. Okay. They were hospitable. The church today should be the most hospitable group of people on earth.
Hmm.
Full stop.
Yeah.
So people should be overwhelmed with hospitality when they come into our buildings. And if they aren't, that's an area where we've got to improve.
Yeah.
And so that's just the first level of this whole problem of trying to welcome and make unchurched people want to attend there. So when you think of practical options, practical applications, what are you thinking about how we apply this, Dakota?
Yeah. Well, and to highlight your point, one of the things that Andy Stanley says in as he's talking about this in his book is he says the unspoken message to the outside world was once you start believing and behaving like us, you are welcome to join us.
Hmm.
When we're talking about how we are presenting ourselves to people, is there an unspoken message within our churches, within our congregations, within our people that says, well, we're happy you're here, but we would like you to act like us in order to stay here. In order to be
Hmm.
comfortable here, we would really appreciate if you looked like, walked like, dressed like, talked like us. And if you
Hmm.
do that, you're welcome to come back.
Hmm.
Or is it come as you are?
Hmm.
Come and meet my Jesus and understand his love. And we
Hmm.
hope that that is what you take away from this. Not that you need to dress in a three-piece suit, not that you need to have all this understanding about things immediately, not that you have to sing every song with gusto like we do immediately and try to study these songs on your own. Do they feel welcome to come and learn to
Hmm.
be as they are and meet Jesus, who will sanctify them, who will bring them along, but also for them to still be able to have their own unique character and personality whenever they come to church on Sunday morning, um, and be who they are, but also understanding that in that they can be a redeemed version of themselves through Christ if they get to know Him and love Him and appreciate Him. So again, do you welcome people if somebody walks in with jeans and a t-shirt, do you welcome them the way you would welcome in somebody who um, is wearing a three-piece suit? Would you love and appreciate them? Would you offer for them to sit next to you? Would you try to invite them to lunch after services the same way you would somebody else? Um, I think these are all ways in which we can help people to feel a little bit more comfortable, and make people want to come back. Can we every time we use, as you say, insider language, can we kind of try to explain that so that way people can know whenever we talk about the propitiation, can we use that in layman's terms instead of just trying to throw propitiation at somebody who has no background to the scriptures and make them not feel so I guess so unwelcome. Maybe we could consider the translation of the Bible we use as well. You may really like the KJV, and that's a whole different conversation for a whole nother day about why maybe you shouldn't be using the KJV. But can you maybe use a more modern translation with modern language so that way the people can feel like they can understand what you're saying? That doesn't
Well,
mean we give up biblical authority to do that, but can we find some common ground here to be able to talk to people?
Totally. Well, and what I would say too, to your point about, they've got, and to Stanley's point about how they've got to dress and act a certain way before they become one of us. Well, so I think there's something practical in that, to be patient. Be
Yeah.
patient. Be patient when people, I don't know. I don't even want to give examples, but just be patient at church when children cry. Be patient when people accidentally misspeak, or be patient when people accidentally, I mean, again, I don't want to give examples, but when people make it clear that they do not know what they're doing, that's okay.
Yeah.
Be patient with them, love on them. We didn't know it I mean, we didn't know when we first learned either. And so we should be patient with others when they're coming to us. And so that's an option. And I would say too, if you see someone that you do not recognize, go talk to them. Don't
Yeah.
avoid them like the plague. Go
No.
talk to them. And if there are specifics about your service, like for us, we have coffee after worship. That'd be a good opportunity. Hey, after worship, I'm gonna go get some coffee. You want to go with me? Or whatever. We have coffee for you. Here's where our bathrooms are. Something to welcome them and maybe introduce your family to them. And that would help them feel more welcomed and, make them feel a part of the family. And that's what we should be striving to do.
Absolutely. Sometimes I know there can be a fear, maybe if you're in a larger congregation, that maybe that person's been going there for 2 years and you just don't know them, and you don't want to welcome somebody who's actually been a faithful member for a couple years. But if that mistake happens, try not to take yourself too seriously. Just roll with it. And maybe that's an opportunity for you to finally meet somebody who you haven't talked to for 2 years, welcome these opportunities. Don't think that I think sometimes we fear judgment. We fear what could happen in the worst sense, and we get so concerned about that we can miss opportunities to love people, to give ourselves to people in vulnerability, and to be able to develop connections and establish relationships that can not only hopefully uplift and maybe bring somebody else to Christ, but can uplift you and bring you closer to Christ and being more Christ-like in the way that you are handling yourself in these ways. So I think these are good conversations. We're going to kind of continue having some more conversations about the way about some of the things that Andy Stanley says and mentions that we can maybe do church a little bit better. And we're not saying better from the standpoint of being a more holy service, but I think that we can be a church that is more outsider friendly, more open to non-Christians being able to come in and become Christians. Because really, at the end of the day, I do think worship is about worshiping and serving our God, and one of the best ways we can do that is by glorifying Him to the point where we can bring other people in because we are
Mm,
showing Christ so much in our lives that our churches are being filled with people who were unchurched and now know God and love God and
yes,
have given their lives to God. There's no better way really we can glorify God than that.
absolutely. And more than anything, I love that we call ourselves a Church of Christ because we are a church that is trying to follow Jesus. And I think about Jesus and his invitation, come to me, all you are who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest.
Sure.
This world is weary, this world is heavy laden, and this world is ready for something different that they can't find here. And many people are looking for God and they're looking for what Jesus offers them. And so let's be that church of let's welcome and be hospitable like Christ was. So we really appreciate you guys joining us today. And as we further this conversation, we hope you'll join us again next time. Until next time, let's strive to follow the teachings of Jesus. Bye for now.